Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. It is Chris Niccolls here, and look what I've got. It is an OM System OM-5. Now, earlier this year, OM System released their first camera under their own OM System brand, the OM-1. It had a lot of interesting features, total new redesign, and it was actually a very capable camera. Today, we've got the second camera that they're launching under OM System, the OM-5. Let's find out if it stacks up. Aha, now I just said stacked, so now you're thinking, oh, Chris is gonna make a clever segue to the fact that this has a stacked 20 megapixel CMOS chip. Well, unfortunately it doesn't. It does not have a stacked chip at all, despite the best attempts of all the rumor sites. This has the same 20 megapixel sensor that we've seen in cameras like the E-M5 Mark III. I mean, it's not just the sensor. I mean, I'm looking at this camera and it's a really good looking camera in the exact same way that the E-M5 Mark III was a really good looking camera, because they look identical. I mean, other than the badge change and the fact that up here on the drive button, you've got a black instead of silver mount. I mean, I don't know, it's an E-M5 Mark III in so many ways, shapes, and forms. So as I go through the video here, I'm just gonna point out things that are the same as the E-M5 Mark III and then what notable differences there are. And first off, let's talk about the body and handling. Now, this has the exact same body and handling, basically. I mean, same control dials, same grip, same custom buttons, articulating LCD panel, same battery type. I mean, it's all identical. Now, there are some benefits there. This is, for an entry-level camera, a really nice handling camera as far as dials go. You got a really nice lockable mode dial. You've got 2 command dials. They've always been in a great spot. They feel good. And a good amount of buttons that you can customize. But there are some major downsides to the M5 Mark III that really should have been improved here. We have no AF joystick, and on this camera, we're going to talk about the autofocus, but you could really use an AF joystick once you find out how this camera focuses. The touchscreen does give the option to move the autofocusing point that way, but I wish we had some sort of joystick. The ports on this camera, they are exactly the same as the E-M5 Mark III. Now, one single SD card slot UHS 2, that's fine. I have no problem with that for a camera this price rating, but here's where I really think things should have been improved. The mic jack is here, but no headphone jack. They had an opportunity to upgrade that. They did not. And even worse here, the USB charging port. Now, this does charge, but it's incredibly slow by today's standards because it's using the old style USB micro B port. Now, that's unfortunate, especially with everything going USB-C and it giving us much faster data rate transfers and faster USB charging. That's an unfortunate legacy that we have from the E-M5 Mark III, and I really think they should have updated that. There is one nice improvement though with the OM-5, and it's not something you can see on the outside, it's actually on the inside. This has much better weather resistance than the E-M5 Mark III. It's up to IPX53, which protects this camera against water coming with force from multiple angles. So that's really nice, whereas the E-M5 Mark III was an IPX1 rating, which basically just protected it from light rain. Oh, but I'm not finished though. Here's another thing that seems like a big misstep. The OM System OM-1 featured a brand new menu system, and it was excellent. I mean, it's easy to use, less complicated, but more importantly, if you're starting out, any features that are grayed out, the OM-1 would actually explain what you need to change to make them work again, and that's super useful. Here on the OM-5, we've got a brand new camera coming out after the OM-1, but it's using the menu system from the E-M5 Mark III. If something's grayed out, it just says, cannot be used in this particular situation. And again, that doesn't help out a beginner photographer at all. It certainly doesn't help out an experienced photographer either. And I just think for more of an entry-level camera, why not make the menu system easier to use, especially when you have a newer menu system ready to go? So how about if we're gonna use the OM-5 for faster action photography? First, let's talk about drive speed. Now, as I mentioned, it's the same sensor we had in the M5 Mark III, so I was not surprised to see it's the same drive speed. But actually, this is not a bad thing. I mean, this camera can shoot 10 frames per second with its mechanical shutter mode and up to 30 frames per second in electronic shutter mode. And frankly, although it hasn't changed, those are still pretty impressive figures for this price point of camera, and really the target audience is going to be using it. I especially like 10 frames per second mechanical, no rolling shutter issues, and actually does a really good job for kids, some sports, and pets. So I don't have any problems with that. Autofocusing though is another story, and I want to give you some context. So if you've ever used older Olympus cameras, although they did have a hybrid autofocusing system, how they basically worked was this. The tracking, not very good. And what you really ended up doing for sports action and wildlife was continuous autofocus with a wider zone and just limiting that zone and trying to keep your subject in it. Very much like we would do on a classic DSLR. It worked, but it certainly wasn't modern. Now the OM-1 changed that a lot because the OM-1 added subject detection modes and tracking that actually worked very effectively with those subject detection modes. So now when we talk about the OM-5, unfortunately we don't get the subject detection modes from the OM-1, things like animals or planes, trains, automobiles. We do still have face detection, and with continuous autofocus with tracking, I actually find that it is improved with face detection. Did a good job of tracking Jordan here, and our hit rate was pretty good with continuous shooting. However, I will say that with inanimate objects and tracking, we still find that it's kind of inconsistent. It just doesn't work enough that I would rely on it all the time, and I would still find myself going back to continuous autofocus using a zone or a box if I would shoot things like animals, definitely. But otherwise, I do like that there's some improvements here. I just wish it was more substantial. What we do have that's a substantial upgrade is we now have a lot of the new OM system computational photographic modes. And this is actually what was really good about the Olympus cameras. This is what's fantastic about the OM-1, and we do now have some of them here. Let's start with one of my favorites, which is Live ND. So this is basically compositing images. Anything which is moving blurs, anything which is stationary stays sharp. You can do it handheld at actually surprisingly slow shutter speed equivalents. And I do really like it because it means this tripod that I brought with me, I don't need it. I'm going to drop it on the ground. I don't need it. So we came to the river here to do some shots just to illustrate this effect. I'm getting 4 stops of equivalent ND. That's not as good as the OM-1 6 stops of ND, but it's still really handy. If I really stop down the aperture on a fairly bright day, I can still get some of that motion blur effect for water and waterfalls and things like that. But I can absolutely couple it with using ND filters and polarizers, put those on there, and then use that 4 stops on top of that. And then I can avoid diffraction by not closing my aperture down all the way, something very important on Micro Four Thirds cameras, but I can also do things like still hand hold down to, in some cases, like 2 seconds or longer. I mean, it really is quite impressive. So I get that really cool slow shutter speed effect without having to bring a tripod, and it really is very convenient and very effective. Now you can pull off handheld shots like that easily because this camera actually has a substantial upgrade over the E-M5 Mark III. It's got a new IBIS unit, that in-body image stabilization gives us 6.5 stops of equivalent stabilization. That's a really nice upgrade. You actually get 7.5 stops if you use some of the lenses that support Sync IS. But really what this means is you get stable shots, a hallmark advantage that Olympus cameras enjoyed before, and that OM system is upgrading consistently, and trust me, you really want that. We have another nice feature that's been upgraded here. The E-M5 Mark III had Hi-Res mode where it would composite images together to give you an 80 megapixel file, but you needed to use a tripod. The OM-5 now has Handheld Hi-Res mode. Now you can still use a tripod and get 80 megapixels, but if you're okay with 50 megapixels, you can do this handheld, just like we had on the OM-1. It works very effectively. Still doesn't handle moving subjects very well. You can see in the examples here, the cars still look kind of funny, but you do get improved detail, and again, you don't need a tripod to do it, so I'm carrying this around for nothing again. It's video talk time, and Jordan and I discussed it, and honestly, the updates are so minor that it wasn't worth really having him on here changing the microphone over, putting on new stickies or anything. So anyways, here we go. Basically, we've got the same video suite as the E-M5 Mark III, including that annoying quirk where you only get the highest data rate when shooting the Cinema 4K mode. But there are some updates that are worth talking about. So first off, no record limit. I mean, that's nice, up from the half hour that we used to have. The camera now has OM log. It's 8 bits. You can't push that much, but it's still a nice touch if you want to grade your video further. This will also work as a webcam, which is pretty cool. Plug it into USB onto your computer. You can use a webcam. And if you're going to do vertical video, which everybody's into now, this will now recognize that you are shooting vertically and then display it as such in post. But overall, minor updates. Okay, so there's some more features that we want to talk about that have been upgraded, but we kind of have to wait for it to get a little bit darker. So when you see us again, we'll be fed and it'll be nighttime, and we'll continue our review. Okay, so clearly it's nighttime now, and we're on a busy overpass, so I apologize for the audio, but it all makes sense because we're out here shooting some night shots and really looking at some more features on the OM-5. Now, the OM-5 does have some great classic modes like Live Bulb, Live Time, and Live Composite. And yes, those were available on the E-M5 Mark III as well, but they're just so useful, we feel like it's worth talking about again on this camera. So I'm playing with the Live Composite mode, which is a lot of fun. Basically, the camera takes one shot of the ambient scene, and then when I shoot the shutter again, I can then visually see anything bright show up in the frame, and it just builds it onto the image, just paints it onto the image, and I can composite things like car light trails and cityscapes, or this is also great for things like blurry clouds and landscapes, or lightning and fireworks, trying to capture all that. And it really takes a lot of the guesswork out, takes a lot of the test shots out, makes it easy and makes it fun. This is something Olympus started, did very well, and this is something that OM system is carrying on. Now, there is another feature I do want to talk about that is now moved over to the OM-5 that you would not find on the E-M5 Mark III, and that's the starry or autofocus, if you want to put it that way. Now, this is basically just a built-in way of focusing properly on the pinpoints of stars, something that's actually quite difficult to do with other cameras, where you have to, punch in, magnify, and really fine-tune the focus and try to get those stars pinpoint. I mean, this just takes that out. Again, no guesswork, very easy, automatically does it for you, and it's nice to see it here on the OM-5. So, turns out I did eventually need the tripod after all, so I'm glad that I brought it, but had a lot of fun tonight, and had a lot of fun just actually shooting this camera. We've had it for quite a while and used it a lot, and I think that's something we don't always get across in the reviews. It is a really fun camera to use. But despite the fact that we've got some substantial upgrades like the stabilization, slightly better autofocus, and really those computational photo modes that I do love, it still felt like using an E-M5 Mark III. It was a dated experience. And the fact is, if you do watch our E-M5 Mark III review, even in that 2 years ago, we talked about how that camera was borrowing a lot from, an E-M1 Mark II, and that it at the time even felt quite dated. Okay, so I think we've established this camera's not doing anything revolutionary in the market. It's just catching up to what a lot of other companies already have. Now we have a camera 2 years later. It's got the exact same body and all the issues that come with that. We still don't have some upgrades to the body that actually could have really made this camera fantastic. And then when you start to consider what this camera's up against as far as competition, well, then you've got cameras like the Sony a6100, the new Canon EOS R10, the Fujifilm X-S10. These cameras all, to some degree or another, focus better and more accurately, and with interesting subject detection modes that are more capable than this. A lot of them have better video capabilities, and so again, it becomes hard to really justify why you'd want to go this way. So can you look at this camera in a very cynical way and say, oh, we've got an old camera, they've just bolted some stuff into it, and that's not enough to really make it appealing? You certainly can, and I have to admit, when I first played with it, I thought that too, but there is a niche for this camera, and the fact is, we took this on our family vacation to San Diego, Jordan and I, and it was actually perfect for that, because it's super lightweight. The Micro Four Thirds lenses are very compact. I don't have to bring a tripod. I don't have to bring filters. I could still do a lot of creative stuff, and that really is the appeal of both what the Olympus cameras used to do and what the OM cameras are doing now. You've got a very easy, very fun, very compact body, and if that's specifically what you might want to use for your photography, this could be a really good option. But if you are getting into a new system and you don't specifically need to have the lightest, most compact kit, there are a lot of other options out there, and they do have a more modern feel and more modern features. Voice your opinions in the comments below. Cool little niche tool or a dinosaur? You let us know. I mean, I know you will. Do check out our sample gallery though on DPReview.com. Links in the description below. Check out the Instagram, check out the Twitter, subscribe, like the channel. We'd always appreciate all that. But thank you guys for joining us on this OM-5 review, and otherwise we'll see you guys soon for another episode of DPReview TV.